They say history is written by the victors, but what if the truth was buried with the fallen? Every secret leaves a trace, if you know where to look. This is The Broken Truth, decoding history, one broadcast at a time. The Broken Truth podcast, where history meets conspiracy. Every case tells a story, every story hides a lie. The low, hollow sound of wind howling across a high-altitude plateau. It is desolate, thin, and cold. Underneath, a very faint rhythmic chipping sound, stone against stone, slow, methodical, and heavy. Stand in the shadow of the Andes, 13,000 feet above the sea level. The air here is thin. It tastes of dust, ozone, and cold antiquity. Your lungs burn with every breath. You're standing on the Altiplano of Bolivia, a place that feels less like a landscape and more like the surface of another planet. This is Puma Punku. Look down at the ground. You're not looking at rocks. You're looking at a puzzle that defies the logic of history. Before you lies a slab of gray andesite, a volcanic rock so dense, so hard, that in modern industry, we use it to test the durability of diamond-tipped drill bits. This single block weighs 130 tons. Run your hand along the groove, cut into its surface. It is cool to the touch. It is smooth, not like a rough-hewn wall, but like a glass countertop. The groove is a perfect right angle, not good enough, not visually straight. It is geometrically perfect, within a tolerance of microns. Inside the groove, there are drill holes, small, equidistant, penetrating the stone with a steadiness that human muscle cannot replicate. We are told that the people who built this had no wheel. We're told they had no iron. We're told they had no writing, no mathematics beyond counting corn, and no technology greater than a copper chisel and a stone hammer. If you take a copper chisel and strike this stone, the copper will shatter. The stone will remain scratched, perhaps, but unbroken. Copper is soft. Andesite is eternal. Yet, here it sits, a quiet, terrifying impossibility. The mainstream textbooks tell us this is a temple complex built by the Tiwanaku culture around 500 AD. They tell us that thousands of men chewing coca leaves to fight the altitude sickness drag these stones from a quarry 10 kilometers away. They tell us they rub these stones with sand for decades to achieve these perfect lines. But if you look closely, if you really look, you see something else. You see a factory. You see prefabrication. You see a level of standardization that suggests blueprints, not prayer. This is not a ruin. It is a crime scene. And the evidence suggests that the timeline of human history, the story of our slow linear ascent from the mud to stars, is a fabrication, a comforting lie we tell ourselves to hide the terrifying truth that we are not the first. We are merely survivors. This is The Broken Truth. I'm your host, Garrett, and you're listening to an investigation into the shadows of our past. Welcome to The Broken Truth. We live in a state of collective amnesia. Our history books tell a clean, orderly story. It is a story of progress. We were hunter-gatherers, wandering the plains. Then, roughly 6,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, a spark ignited. We discovered agriculture. We built mud huts. Those huts became cities. We invented the wheel, the chariot, the steam engine, and finally, the microprocessor. A straight line, upward, and unbroken. It is a seductive narrative. It places us, modern humanity, at the very pinnacle of existence. It tells us that we are the smartest, most capable beings to ever walk the earth. But the earth beneath our feet tells a different story. Scattered across the planet, from the bedrock of Egypt to the mountaintops of Peru, from the underwater ruins off the coast of Japan to the megaliths of Lebanon, are anomalies that refuse to fit that linear timeline. We find stones weighing over 1,000 tons, lifted and placed with the delicacy of a feather. We find precision engineering that defies our modern capabilities. We find evidence of a science that was lost, buried under a cataclysm of water and fire. For the next hour, we're peeling back the layers of the official narrative. We're looking at the engineering of a lost epoch, what many call the pre-flood civilization. We're asking the dangerous question, did a high-technology society exist before the last ice age? And if so, what destroyed them? This is not a story about aliens. This is a story about us, about what we forgot. This is a long journey into the dark. we need you with us. Follow The Broken Truth on Spotify so you never miss an episode. To understand the anomaly, we must first understand the rule. We must respect the established narrative because it is constructed by brilliant men and women who have dedicated their lives to digging in the dirt. We cannot simply dismiss archaeology. We have to understand why they believe what they believe. The standard model of history, the one taught in every university from Oxford to Harvard, relies on the principle of uniformitarianism and linear progression. It is a logical, comfortable framework. It asserts that civilization is a recent phenomenon. According to this view, the Neolithic revolution was the turning point. Around 10,000 BC, the ice receded. The climate warmed. Humans in the Levant, the Natufians, began to settle. They domesticated wheat, they domesticated goats, and slowly, over thousands of years of trial and error, they learned to stack stones. By 2500 BC, this slow accumulation of knowledge culminated in the Old Kingdom of Egypt. Let's look at the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is the ultimate benchmark. Mainstream Egyptology dates this structure to the 4th dynasty, roughly 2560 BC, built as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu. It is composed of 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite. The logistics, according to the textbooks, were a triumph of organization and manpower. We used to believe these were built by slaves, whipped into submission, but recent excavations by archaeologists like Dr. Mark Lenner have changed that story. In the late 1990s, Lenner excavated the lost city of the pyramid builders at the Giza Plateau. He didn't find slave pens. He found a corporate town. He found dormitories capable of sleeping 2,000 men. He found massive bakeries. He analyzed the animal bones found in the refuse pits. These workers weren't eating gruel. They were eating prime beef, sheep, and goat. Meat that was expensive and rare. They were eating better than average Egyptian villagers. The official story paints a picture of national unity. During the annual Nile floods, when the fields were underwater and farming was impossible, the pharaoh would conscript the population. It was a tax paid in labor, a way to unify the country. But how did they build it? Without the wheel, which Egypt would not adopt until the invasion of the Hyksos centuries later, the engineering explanation is purely mechanical. Simple machines, the inclined plane, the lever, and the roller. The quarrying of the limestone blocks was achieved, we are told, by using copper chisels and stone mauls. Imagine the scene. A worker takes a copper chisel. He strikes the limestone. The copper is soft. It blunts quickly. A second worker takes the chisel to sharpen it. This happens thousands of times a day. For the harder stones, the granite, they use dolerite pounders. These are balls of hard rock. The workers would stand over the granite and smash the dolerite ball against it, pulverizing the rock into dust, millimeter by millimeter. Then came the transport. The blocks, averaging 2.5 tons, were placed on wooden sleds. We have paintings of this in the tomb of Jehudi Hotep. There's a depiction of a colossal statue being dragged by 172 men. Standing on the front of the sled is a man pouring liquid onto the sand. For years, archaeologists thought this was a ritual, a libation, but recent physics experiments have proven otherwise. Wet sand halves the friction. It creates a bridge for the sled runners. So they dragged these stones to the pyramid base, but how did they get them 480 feet into the air? This is where the debate within the mainstream gets heated. For decades, the leading single theory was a single straight ramp, a massive earth ramp extending a mile into the desert. But calculations showed that such a ramp would contain more material than the pyramid itself. It was an engineering impossibility. Then came the spiral ramp theory, a ramp made of mud brick and rubble that wrapped around the outside of the pyramid like a corkscrew. But this, too, had problems. It would cover the corners, making it impossible for the architects to check the lines of the structure. Enter Jean-Pierre Houdin. In the early 2000s, the French architect proposed a radical new solution that has gained significant traction in the mainstream. He suggested the internal ramp theory. Houdin argues that the Egyptians used a small external ramp to build the bottom third of the pyramid, but for the top 2/3, they built a ramp inside the pyramid, a spiraling tunnel just behind the outer casing stones, sloping up at a 7% grade. It sounds like fiction, but in 1986, a French survey team used microgravimetry, scanning the density of the pyramid, and found a low-density spiral shape, running exactly where Houdin predicted the ramp would be. Furthermore, On the northeast corner, there is a notch, a chunk of masonry missing. Houdin believes this was a turning point, where the workers would pivot the blocks 90 degrees to move them up to the next leg of the internal spiral. It's a brilliant theory. It solves the material problem. It solves the geometric problem. It requires no aliens, no magic, just genius architectural planning. And what about the cutting, the precision? For this, we turn to the experiments of Denis Stocks, an expert in ancient Egyptian technology. Stocks has spent decades recreating these tools. He has proven that a copper tube spun with a bowstring can drill through granite if you use sand as an abrasive. The copper doesn't cut the stone. The sand cuts the stone. The copper just guides the sand. He has drilled cores, he has cut blocks, he has made vases. The official story leans heavily on these experiments. They say, look, we can do it. It takes a long time, it's incredibly difficult, but it's possible. They argue that we underestimate the ancients. We are impatient. They had all the time in the world. They had a worldview that measured tasks in generations, not fiscal quarters. If a pharaoh said, spend 20 years rubbing this rock with sand until it's flat, they did it, because the pharaoh was a god, and the stone was for eternity. The same logic is applied to the New World. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in Peru, they stood before the walls of Sacsayhuaman. They saw limestone blocks weighing 120 tons, cut with such irregular, interlocking complexity that they looked like a jigsaw puzzle made by giants. The Spanish asked the Inca, how? The Inca reportedly replied, we did not build them. They were here before us. They were built by the gods. But archaeology cannot accept gods as a citation. So the narrative stands. The Inca or their predecessors, the Tiwanaku, used the scribing technique. They would hoist a stone up on a ramp, hold it above the stone it needed to fit into, and use a plumb bob to trace the irregularities of the bottom stone onto the top one. Then, they would lower the stone, pound away the excess with stone hammers, and lift it again. Up and down, pound and check, up and down, hundreds of times for a single joint. This is the official story. It is plausible. It fits the timeline. It keeps the timeline clean. It puts humanity at the top of the evolutionary ladder, right here, right now. We are the masters. They were the apprentices. They were primitive, but determined. They had strong backs of infinite patience. And for a long time, that explanation was enough. It satisfied the curators, it satisfied the historians, and it satisfied us. But then, you stop reading the textbook, and you start looking at the stone. You look at the feed rate of the drills. You look at the vitrification of the rocks. You look at the 100-ton blocks of granite that were moved, not across sand, but across mountainous ravines. And the mathematics of the official story begin to scream. The narrative isn't just cracking, it's bleeding. Because there are things in the dirt that a copper chisel simply cannot do, no matter how much sand you use, no matter how much time you have. We're about to walk through the cracks in the wall. Tap follow on Spotify if you're enjoying this investigation. Let's walk into the Serapeum of Saqqara, Egypt. You're 20 miles south of Cairo, deep underground, carved out of the living bedrock. The air is stale. The darkness is absolute, broken only by a thin beam of your flashlight. You're in the labyrinth of tunnels. In the alcoves of this tunnel system sit 24 massive stone boxes. Mainstream Egyptologists call them sarcophagi. They say they were built to hold the mummified remains of the Apis bulls, sacred animals worshipped as incarnations of the god Ptah. But when Auguste Mariette dynamited one of these boxes open in 1850, he found it empty. No bull, no bones, just the vacuum of empty space. Let's look at the boxes themselves. They're not made of the soft local limestone. They're made of rose granite and diorite, quarried in Aswan, 500 miles away. Diorite is a nightmare to work with. On the Mohs scale of mineral hardness, diamond is a 10. Copper, the only metal tool the dynastic Egyptians supposedly possessed, is a 3.5. Diorite is a 7. This is simple physics. If you try to cut a material with a hardness of 7, with a tool, the hardness of 3, you do not cut the stone, you destroy the tool. Mainstream archaeology suggests they used sand, silica as an abrasive, that they rubbed on the stone for decades, slowly wearing it down like water dripping on a rock. But let's look at the result. These boxes weigh up to 100 tons. The lids alone weigh 30 tons, and the surfaces, they're not just smooth, they're optically flat. In 1995, engineer Christopher Dunn took precision instruments into these tunnels. He used a machinist square, a tool used to calibrate modern industrial machinery. When you place a machinist square against the inside corner of these boxes, in the pitch black, where no light should have allowed for such work, the square sits flush. No light passes through. The error tolerance is less than 2/1000ths of an inch. That is the precision of a modern optical lens manufacturer. That is the precision of a space shuttle heat shield. That is not the precision of a man rubbing a rock with a bag of sand by torchlight. Furthermore, the inside corners are perfect right angles. To achieve that with a hand tool, you need a stroke. You need room to move your arm back and forth to create friction. But in a sharp corner, the amplitude of your stroke drops to zero. You cannot grind a sharp internal corner by hand. You simply can't. You need a rotating tool. You need a drill. And you need power. Sorry to interrupt your regularly scheduled podcast, but this episode is brought to you by the Broken Truth merch. Support the show. Wear the truth. Official Broken Truth podcast merch is live now. Links in the description. And since you've made it this far in the episode, comment hashtag Broken Truth and leave us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. Because when you speak up, the algorithm listens. And so does the world. And the evidence for power tools is not just in the finish. It is in the mistakes. Go to the Petrie Museum in London and look at core 7. It is a core sample of red granite drilled out of the rock. Sir William Flinders Petrie, the father of modern Egyptology, examined this core in the late 19th century. He was baffled. He found spiral grooves running around the granite cylinder. These grooves indicate the feed rate of the drill, how fast the bit sinks into the stone with each rotation. The feed rate on core 7 is 0.1 inches per revolution. We cannot do that today. Our modern diamond tip drills spinning at 900 revolutions per minute cut granite slowly, grinding it away dust speck by dust speck. These ancient drills were plowing through solid granite with a pressure and speed that suggests the stone was yielding like butter. Petrie himself calculated that the pressure on the drill bit must have been over 2 tons. 2 tons of pressure on a moving drill bit. In the Bronze Age? How do you apply 2 tons of downward pressure with a hand-cranked copper tube? You don't. Now, let's leave Egypt. Let's go to Lebanon. At Baalbek, beneath the ruins of a Roman temple to Jupiter, lie the trilithon stones. 3 blocks of limestone, each one weighs 800 tons. They're lifted 20 feet into the air and placed so precisely you cannot fit a razor blade between them. The Romans were incredible engineers. They had cranes, they had pulleys. We have their manuals. We know their limits. The maximum lift capacity of a Roman tripostos crane was roughly 6 tons. If they combined dozens of cranes, maybe they could lift 60 tons. These stones are 800 tons. Roman records exist for the temple built on top of them. But there are no Roman records for the moving of the trilithon. Why? Because the Romans didn't move them. They found them. They looked at them. They realized they couldn't move them and built their temple on top of the only foundation strong enough to hold it. And nearby, still in the quarry, lies the stone of the pregnant woman. It weighs 1,200 tons, and another, found recently, weighs 1,650 tons. If we tried to move a 1,600-ton block today, we would need a specialized crawler transporter, like the ones used by NASA to move the Saturn V rocket. We have only a handful of cranes on the entire planet capable of lifting that weight. Are we really to believe that ropes made of hemp and manpower moved a mountain? The physics don't work. The tensile strength of the rope fails. The crushing weight on wooden rollers turns them to pulp. If you put that much weight on a wooden roller, it doesn't roll. It shatters. Travel east to India. The Barabar Caves. Carved out of single masses of granite. These are not natural caves. They're artificial chambers. The walls polished to a mirror finish. This is known as the Mauryan polish. Mainstream history says these were carved around 300 BC by the Mauryan Empire. But the acoustic properties of these caves are terrifying. The reverberation time is unnatural. If you hum at a specific frequency, the sound builds and builds until it feels like the stone itself is vibrating. Engineers who have studied the surface roughness say the polish is not decorative. It's functional. It's designed to reflect sound waves with zero loss. Why would a group of ascetics living in caves need a room with perfect acoustic reflectivity? Unless the room wasn't for mediation, unless the room was a machine. And finally, let's go to China, the Yangshan Quarry. Here lies a stele, a monument, that was cut but never moved. The base alone weighs 16,000 tons. 16,000 tons. That is the weight of 2 nuclear submarines. The official story is that the Ming Dynasty emperor ordered it cut in the 1400s, then realized it was too heavy to move and abandoned it. Does that sound like a civilization that can build the Great Wall? To cut 16,000 tons of rock before doing the math on how to move it? Or does it look like the work of someone else? Someone who can move it, but was interrupted. The narrative's cracking. We're seeing the fingerprints of a technology that prioritized acoustics, vibration, and hardness. A technology that does not resemble our own, but surpasses it in durability. The evidence is staring us in the face. Someone else was here, and they had tools we are only just beginning to understand. Tap follow on Spotify if you're enjoying this investigation. If it wasn't copper chisels, and if it wasn't aliens, because we are looking for a terrestrial solution here, then who built these? And more importantly, how? When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. We are entering the realm of the lost civilization. This is not a conspiracy theory, it's a hypothesis growing in legitimacy among geologists, engineers, and rogue academics. The theory posits that human history is cyclical, not linear, that we have reached this height before. We call them the Atlanteans, the antediluvians, the pre-flood culture, the name that doesn't matter. What matters is their capability. Let's look at 3 specific technologies that could explain the impossible. Theory 1, acoustic engineering. Across the globe, these megalithic sites share specific measurable acoustic properties. They are not just piles of rock, but instruments. The Hypogeum in Malta, the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, the passage tombs of Newgrange in Ireland. When scientists test these chambers, they find that they resonate at a specific frequency, 110 to 111 hertz. This is not a random number. Neurological studies have shown that when the human brain is exposed to 110 hertz, the prefrontal cortex, the center of logic and language, deactivates. The language centers switch off. Meanwhile, the parts of the brain associated with intuition, visualization, and emotional processing go into overdrive. It induces a trance state, a state of hyperfocus. But could sound do more than alter consciousness? Could it alter matter? We have accounts from early travelers in Tibet. They describe monks using massive horns and drums, arranged in precise geometric arcs, to levitate heavy stones up sheer cliff faces. For a long time, this was dismissed as folklore. But today, in modern physics labs, we have acoustic levitation. We can suspend water droplets, styrofoam beads, and even small insects in midair using standing sound waves. The sound creates a pressure trap that gravity cannot break. If you scale that physics up, if you understand the resonant frequency of granite, the song of the stone, it is possible to make the stone weightless, to vibrate the lattice of the atoms so that gravity loses its hold. Maybe the magic words in ancient myths weren't spells. Maybe they were frequencies, codes. Theory 2, geopolymers. This is the brainchild of Dr. Joseph Davidovits, a material scientist. He proposed that the stones of the Great Pyramid were not quarried, cut and dragged. He proposed that they were cast. Davidovits suggests the Egyptians possessed a form of ancient concrete, a geopolymer. They would take soft limestone, dissolve it in pools of water, mix it with natron and lime, and turn it into a slurry. Then, workers would carry buckets of this wet sludge up to the pyramid, pour it into the wooden molds, and let it sit. This would explain the tight fit. If you pour wet concrete next to a dry block, it fills every microscopic gap. It explains why there are no chisel marks. It explains how they move them. They didn't move 2.5-ton blocks. They moved buckets of mud. Scientists have found air bubbles, hair, and organic fibers inside samples of pyramid stone, things that should not be inside natural sedimentary rock. This is a compelling theory, but it has a flaw. It works for limestone. It does not work for granite. You cannot cast granite. Granite is igneous. It is born of fire and magma cooling deep within the earth. You cannot dissolve it and repour it. So while geopolymers might explain the bulk of the pyramid, they do not explain the Serapeum boxes. They do not explain the 800-ton blocks at Baalbek. Theory 3, the Great Year. This is the key to the timeline. Many of these structures are aligned to the stars with a precision that accounts for the precession of the equinoxes. The Earth wobbles on its axis like a dying top. It takes 25,920 years to complete one full wobble. This cycle is called the Great Year. As the Earth wobbles, the constellations behind the rising sun on the spring equinox change. The ancients were obsessed with this cycle. In the 1990s, geologist Robert Schoch stood in the front of the Great Sphinx of Giza. Mainstream history says the Sphinx was carved around 2500 BC, but Schoch looked at the enclosure walls. He didn't see wind erosion. He didn't see sand erosion. He saw precipitation-induced weathering, rain, vertical fissures, deep rolling undulations in the rock that can only be caused by thousands of years of heavy tropical rainfall. The last time the Sahara experienced rain that heavy was during the Neolithic subpluvial. That era ended roughly 5000 to 7000 BC. But to get to that level of erosion, Schoch estimated the Sphinx must have been standing there since at least 10,500 BC. If the Sphinx is 12,000 years old, everything we know about history is wrong. It means there was a high culture during the Ice Age, a culture that navigated the globe, mapped the planet, and built monuments to preserve their knowledge before the end came. They knew the flood was coming, they knew the cycle was ending, and they built in stone because stone is the only thing that survives the water. The declassified documents and anomalies. Let's open the file. We deal in facts here, and the facts buried in government archives, naval records, and geological surveys are more disturbing than any myth. Item 1, the Piri Reis map, opens a new window. The map of Van Noort at the Strait of Magellan, 1599. This document sits in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. It was compiled in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, drawn on gazelle skin. Piri Reis noted in the margins that he did not map this himself. He compiled it from 20 older charts, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. The map shows the western coast of Africa and the eastern coast of South America with surprising accuracy for 1513. But that's not the anomaly. The anomaly is at the bottom of the map. It shows the northern coastline of Antarctica. Antarctica was not discovered by modern civilization until 1818. But the Piri Reis map doesn't just show the ice, it shows landmass beneath the ice. It shows the coastline of Queen Maud Land as it would appear without the glacial shelf. Geological surveys confirm that the Queen Maud Land has been covered by ice for at least 6,000 years. In the 1960s, Professor Charles Hapgood sent this map to the U.S. Air Force for analysis. He received a reply from Lieutenant Colonel Harold Z. Ohlmeyer, commander of the 8th Renaissance Technical Squadron. I want you to listen to this quote exactly. This is the U.S. Air Force speaking. The geographical detail shown in the lower part of the map agrees very remarkably with the results of the seismic profile made across the top of the ice cap by the Swedish-British Antarctic Expedition of 1949. This indicates the coastline had been mapped before it was covered by the ice cap. The request implies that the coastline had been mapped before it was covered by the ice. This is an enigma. Who was mapping Antarctica 6,000 years ago? Who had the ships? Who had the navigational math to calculate longitude thousands of years before Harrison invented the chronometer? Item 2, the CIA and the Adam and Eve story. In 1966, the CIA declassified a book by a man named Chan Thomas. It was titled The Adam and Eve Story. Why would the Central Intelligence Agency classify a book about geology and history? It was released decades later in a sanitized version under the Freedom of Information Act. Thomas proposed a theory of cyclic catastrophism. He argued that the Earth goes through rapid pole shifts, not taking millions of years, but happening in a terrifyingly short window. The lithosphere, the crust, slides over the molten core like the skin of an orange spinning loose from the fruit. The result, supersonic winds, the atmosphere detaching, mile-high tsunamis, the oceans leaving their basins and washing over the continents at the speed of a jetliner. Thomas argued that this has happened before, that Noah's flood was real, that the pre-flood civilization wasn't destroyed by a war, but by the mechanics of the planet itself. The CIA kept this 57-page document classified for years. Why? What were they afraid of? Were they afraid of the science, or were they afraid of the panic? Item 3. The Braylorn Museum Anomaly. Deep in a gold mine in British Columbia, miners found a wall. They were following a gold vein when they hit a barrier. It was a wall made of stone blocks, roughly 12 inches by 6 inches, cemented together with a bonding agent unknown to science. The disturbing part, they found it under a layer of unbroken volcanic lava. Geologists dated the lava flow to millions of years ago. If the wall is under the wall is older than the lava. Who was building masonry walls in North America millions of years ago? Item 4. Light art technology. Right now, as we speak, we are rewriting the history of the Amazon. For centuries, we thought the Amazon was a pristine wilderness, a counterfeit paradise that could only support small tribes. But now, we're scanning the rainforest with LiDAR, light detection and ranging. We're stripping away the canopy digitally. We're finding vast cities, geometric earthquakes, pyramids, road networks connecting settlements that could house millions of people. In the Xingu region, we see evidence of garden cities. We see a civilization that engineered the soil itself, Terra Preta, a black earth so fertile it regenerates itself. We're walking on top of a graveyard of empires. The evidence suggests that a global seafaring, master-building civilization existed. They had accurate maps of the entire planet. They possessed engineering that defies the copper chisel. And then, the water rose, the temperature spikes, the comets hit, and the silence fell. Tap follow on Spotify if you're enjoying this investigation. Why it matters today. Why does this whole thing matter? Why should you, commuting to work or sitting in your living room or walking your dog, why should you care if a stone was cut by a copper chisel or a sonic drill 12,000 years ago? It matters because it changes the definition of who we are. If the linear model of history is true, then we are the apex. We are the masters of the universe, steadily improving, invincible in our glass towers. We are the adults in the room, and the ancients were the children. It means we are safe. It means the only way is up. But if the cyclical model is true, we are fragile. We are merely the current tenants of a violent property. These ancient megaliths, the Great Pyramid, the walls of Cusco, the stones of Baalbek, they were not just tombs. They were not just temples. They were time capsules. The people who built them knew something we have forgotten. They understood the impermanence of things. They knew that wood rots, iron rusts, and concrete crumbles. They knew that books burn and hard drives fail. If our civilization ended tomorrow, if the grid went down, if the oceans rose, if the magnetic poles flipped, what would remain of us in 10,000 years? Our skyscrapers gone. The rebar inside the concrete would rust, expand, and shatter the buildings within a few centuries. Our computers, dust. Our libraries, mold and soil. The only thing that would survive to tell our story would be our nuclear waste and the plastic in the ocean. We would leave behind a layer of toxic sludge, not a monument to our genius. The ancients built in stone, massive, impossible stone. They wanted to send a message to the future, to us. They were screaming across the millennia. They were saying, we were here, we were great, we mastered the earth, and we fell. They are a warning. We are obsessed with our own reflection. We think our technology makes us gods, but a simple solar flare, a Carrington event, could wipe out our electrical grid in seconds. A single asteroid impact could reset the clock to zero. Looking at these stones is an act of humility. It forces us to realize that we are part of a cycle that rises and falls, a destruction and rebirth. We are suffering from species-wide amnesia. We have forgotten our parents. We have forgotten where we came from. And because we don't know where we came from, we don't know where we're going. We're walking blindly into the same catastrophe that wiped them out. The stones are the only things that remember, and if you listen closely, they're trying to wake us up. The investigation does not end here. The stones are still there, waiting. They've watched civilizations rise and fall like tides. They've seen the ice come and go. They have seen the sky burn, and they will likely be there long after we are gone. Next time you look at the history book, ask yourself, is this the truth, or is it just the story we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night? The truth is broken. It is scattered in the ruins. It's waiting for you to pick up the pieces. This has been The Broken Truth. Follow The Broken Truth on Spotify and share this episode with someone who's ready for the truth.
In a world built on hidden histories and half-truths, we've only just begun to peel back the layers. Because what you've heard tonight was never meant to be known, but you were meant to find it. If you're ready to go deeper, leave us a review, comment your thoughts, share this episode, and step inside the archives. Join the inner circle, where the real evidence is kept. This is the broken truth, because the truth isn't whole, it's broken.